Okay, so this is a new one for me. I'm normally used to doing one of these intros and just kind of gushing about what a jolly conversation I've just had with someone. But yeah, let's see how we do this. Today I'm talking with Brian Pace from Psymposia, and this is one of those conversations that you will either find extremely entertaining or extremely frustrating to listen to. Personally for me, I think it was pretty enjoyable, and it's good to hash this stuff out for the benefit of a public audience. If you're watching this, then you presumably know the background to this topic, and if not, then go and watch this video, which I'll link to up there somewhere. But basically, this conversation is centered around Psymposia, who I have previously criticised for trying to incite irrational hysteria within the psychedelic community. Now, I do want to make the distinction between Brian, the human being, and Psymposia, the kind of collective entity which Brian is representing here. I have no particular problem with Brian as a person, and I want to give him the kudos for stepping up to the plate and having this conversation. That said, I did find him to be a tad unrelatable and a bit robotic with some of his responses, which does seem to be a common theme when dealing with these guys. We cover a lot of stuff here, and I think we both speak for an equal amount of time, so hopefully Psymposia feel like they are fairly represented. And the matter is now in the court of public opinion, so let me know in the comments below what you guys think. I will just give a few thoughts on my takeaways from this conversation. There was a strong narrative from Brian that the ends justify the means, and on that basis he seems to think labelling someone as a sex offender is fine, regardless of whether it's actually factually true, and I find that to be fairly putrid. But, you know, collateral damage, what do you do? There were some parts where it felt like Brian was attempting to gaslight me and doing this reality warping thing that I previously called Psymposia out for, in particular with his comments around their social media output, his blind defense of the toxic behavior of his colleagues, and you can see that for yourself when I match up with the actual screenshots of what Psymposia have been saying with Brian's more sanitized interpretation. Further to this, a lot of his claims around sexual assault would rely on him being some kind of mind reader of people he has never met or even spoken to. All to me which seems just as kooky as the magical claims he clearly holds in disdain from guys like Martin Ball. One of the things we talk about here are power dynamics, and I think this is interesting because the only way Psymposia actually have any power is if we give it to them, and based on this conversation along with my previous video, we definitely should not. I just don't think they are qualified to be the self-appointed watchdogs that they claim they are. Anyway, I'll leave some timestamps in the description below to the major talking points. The recording itself is completely unedited, as in nothing has been taken out, although I will add in some of the social media posts and video clips we discuss for context. Okay, so without further ado, I bring you Brian Pace of Psymposia. Well, yeah, so I'm here with Brian Pace from Psymposia. This is kind of a joint venture, so we'll just introduce each other, even though you might be familiar with each one of us separately. My name is Rob. I'm the host of Adeptus Psychonautica, which is a YouTube channel really about my own psychedelic journey, but as part of that journey, I comment on psychedelic culture. And recently I posted a video which was critical of some of the Symposia's recent videos. So that's pretty much me in a nutshell.
Point of order here. I was curious, should I be referring to you as Rob or as Adeptus during this exchange?
Whatever. I mean, Rob would be fine.
Sounds good. Okay. So my name is Brian Pace. I am the politics and ecology editor at Psymposia, which is a 501c3 watchdog in the psychedelic and drug reform space. We also produce multimedia investigative journalism. We have a podcast called Plus 3. And I also teach a university course on psychedelic studies.
Cool. Well, I mean, the background to this conversation, I say, is this video that I think the immediate conversation is this video that I put out. And from that video, you reached out with a list of sort of, complaints, things that you weren't happy with about that video. So I think there's a few ways we can tackle this. We can either work through some of the things you mentioned in your email. But I think just to get the ball rolling, there was one point which jumped out, which I think might kind of change the whole character of the conversation. So I thought it was a good one to address at first. And this was the thing that you mentioned, and which I've also seen some other people from Psymposia mentioned, that your claim is you have never characterized Martin Ball as a sexual abuser. And I just wondered if you could sort of unpack that a little bit, because I think that's probably contrary to what it appears that you are saying. So what is your actual position on Martin Ball in terms of what he's done and what's motivated this whole campaign?
Okay, so there's actually a lot to address there. So
Sure.
I will address the first point and say that in our reporting, we don't really focus on Martin Ball as like a sexual abuser. However, in the commentary on Twitter that you pictured in your video, there were statements made by our team in commentary that some of the actions that Martin Ball admits to do rise to the level of sexual assault. So that's not the focus of our reporting. Our reporting was not only focused on Martin Ball. Martin Ball was part of a much larger context in that Martin Ball was tapped to write the intro to Mark Hayden's manual to psychedelic guides that is still prominently featured on MAPS Canada's website. Mark Hayden is the outgoing executive director of MAPS Canada. It's endorsed by Rick Doblin, the current head of MAPS, Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Study. Importantly, though, the organization, as a result of our reporting, the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Study, as an organization, has stated that they do not endorse Mark Hayden's guide. So interesting story there.
Sure. So okay, so there are quite a few things there. And I mean, in regards to what your issues with Martin Ball's kind of writing this forward for this guide, I personally don't have a particular problem with that. I think if you've got a complaint that you wanted to leverage at MAPS, then I think you're perfectly welcome to do so. And I think the basis of saying that this is very unorthodox, it's unusual, it's kind of, this is not the norm, this is not like the phrasing that you've used there of this is not the kind of what should be endorsed as for the first sort of batch of trainees. I'd say fine, that go with that all you want. But I think that's putting a bit of a smiley face on what you actually did, because there is a distinctive narrative around what you put out around Martin Ball, and that narrative is of a sexual deviant, an abusive sexual deviant. I mean I think it's just bear with me, Brian.
Excuse me.
So, if I can just throw some of the language that you used, you've referred to him as a molester, as a sexual abuser, as a serial sexual abuser. You've said that he sounds like a paedophile and that the documentation provides is grooming.
It sounds like a pedophile saying to a child, the more you do X for me, the more toys you're gonna get.
Yeah, and that's part of this whole, we really want to emphasize the literature and the discourse around grooming.
No, this is a narrative, and it's clear that you are trying to guide this sort of narrative in a certain direction, because you're not calling him a con man. You're not calling him saying this guy's trying to steal your money. He's a sexual pervert, and this is wrong, Brian. I think so you're right to complain. I would agree with. Is Martin Ball the right person for this training manual? I would agree with. A lot of this I would stand shoulder to shoulder with you on Brian. Like Dennis McKenna would have been a much more obvious choice to who to write this forward, or Robin Carr Harris, or any number of people who the psychedelic community would wholeheartedly endorse. So I'm with you on Martin Ball's controversy, but what you've done is a gross distortion of what was said within those videos. So
I'd like to clarify, if possible. One thing is, the quotes that you pulled out. I think people who did a close read of your video would know that those came from members of the Symposia team. So I personally did not list, in fact, the things that you said: grooming, sexual assaults, molestation. Those actually came from 3 or more separate members of our team. The grooming came specifically in a video that you don't mention in your critique of our work, which spends a lot of time on the topic of consent. So I want to draw a distinction here between Symposia's reporting, that which shows up on our channel as a part of the works that we produce, the things that we publish on our website, the polished materials that we produce as our podcast, and even things that posts that come from the official Twitter account of Psymposia, and the individuals who are part of Psymposia who may be making comments on these as we have engaged with people's complaints and praise of our reporting. So when we're talking about our reporting, it's the prior. We're talking about our commentary. I want to make this clear for everyone so that we understand what we're talking about. All of the things aside from the grooming came from commentary, okay? So in terms of engaging with our narrative, it seems to make more sense to engage with what we've put the most effort into reporting, which would be the Mark Hayden issue, the video, the original video, the follow-up video that we made in response that everybody said that, not everybody, some people complained that the Victor Berger style editing somehow, drew away from the content, which was really just quotations from his talk. So with that, please go on.
Okay. Well, I mean, my take on that one, I think that just, I mean, first of all, just to sort of clarify everyone, whenever I say you, I'm not specifically referring to you, Brian. I'm referring to Psymposia collectively. So please, don't blur the two. I'm not saying that you personally did some of these things, but I think that to make that distinction, what you just done, saying that the Psymposia Twitter and the individual members Twitter are a distinct entity from what's coming out on the channel. I think that's incredibly naive. And I think, a lot of the things, in fact, I think pretty much all these things, whenever an individual within Psymposia says something, it's retweeted by the main account, and it's all retweeted by the individual members. And often some of these things are then referenced later on in other people's messages. So there is this, what looks like a campaign, a narrative. It kind of floods out of Psymposia. And I think to have that distinction saying, well, this is not our official reporting, is a little bit, I mean, let me just throw an example at you. Do you think it would be reasonable for me to promote this video? Because that's what you're doing. You're promoting the videos via your Twitter and other accounts. If I promoted this video as my interview with the child molester, Brian Pace, would that be a reason? And could I then say, well, hold on, no. No, I never actually called Brian Pace a child molester, but that's not the official thing. It's not the real reporting. I mean, that's bullshit. Of course, I'm
talking about the distinction between commentary and reporting. Whether or not they're part of a larger narrative that you choose to focus on, that's fine. I mean, I'm not denying that members of our team have said what they said. I also happen to agree that Martin Ball's behavior, which includes vomiting on psychedelized clients and manipulating their genitals, rises to the level of molestation and abuse. And he has talked about having done both of these things on multiple occasions. From what I can gather from the video that we posted, there's at least 3 separate accounts. I would guess that there's more, particularly the way that he speaks about it. So that does describe a pattern of behavior, does it not? But hang on, I want to back up real quick, and I want to say that in some ways, so you have sort of engaged Psymposia as bad actors or bad faith actors, and this is something that we've unfortunately heard more than once. And so I wanted to show up on a number of occasions, but I also wanted to explain why. So I'm not really here because you made a mean video about us. I'm not. But I also want to say that I'm here in good faith. I want to say that there are things that I like about your channel. I was aware of your channel before all of this Martin Ball stuff came about. I also want to say that Russell didn't choose the clip that he chose of yours for any malicious purpose, and you seem to acknowledge that. Yeah, sure. But I also want to say that this isn't really about you. Like, this isn't like a personal attack. I'm engaging because I care about safety. I care about making sure that someone is paying attention to what Maps and Maps Canada are doing as they craft the future of psychedelia, as they craft the pedagogy that is training generations of therapists. And I also care about the process of manufacturing authority and who gains it and how. Okay.
Yeah, and I would say, Brian, I completely take that on board. And for most of what you just said there, I would stand shoulder to shoulder with you on this stuff, Brian. But I think what I also care about as part of my motivations are very similar to yours, and part of that is stopping the psychedelic discourse turning into hysteria. And I think what you've done here is basically drive a kind of a mob mentality, because I think we can certainly get into it, but to say that what Martin Ball did is sexual abuse is, to put it as a stretch, is mild. To then put it as things like molestation. I mean, molestation meaning, is, I don't know if the definition carries across, but in England, molestation is child abuse. That's what molestation.
That's not the same message here.
I mean, you have a child. Okay, well,
US.
this in Europe. So if you molest, it's a child molester. You don't really get an adult molester.
It's commonly associated, but really anybody can be molested.
Sure,
as far as I understand the usage here.
Sure, but I'm just saying that's it's part of the narrative that goes out. And then when you follow it up with things like, he sounds like a paedophile, this is a grooming document. I mean, I think you've way crossed the line beyond the initial complaint, which I would fully support.
It was a grooming document, though. Actually, I'm curious, rather than like focusing on these individual comments that you clearly have already made clear you disagree with. You mentioned that you had read the info sheet that Martin Ball has used, and his supporters have used, to argue that everything that Martin Ball described, despite how heinous you have argued this, was consensual. So I was curious, what is your analysis of that info sheet? Do you think that is a document that that qualifies as good practice, or even like could constitute a consensual arrangement?
I think the document on its own is part of a landscape, and even by your own sort of how you described it, it is a pre-session information. So my understanding is that this is something that when you sign up for a session, this is the first bit of information you get. And certainly I've had similar things from ayahuasca retreats and other kind of medicine retreats. You sign up for the retreat and they send you, for ayahuasca, typically it tells you don't eat these kind of foods and stuff like that. So reading it in that kind of context, I was absolutely fine with it. In fact, I thought it was one of the better produced of this kind of pieces of documentation I'd seen. It certainly does state that, what's in store in terms of the Martin Ball experience. And again, this is not me endorsing the Martin Ball experience, but I think I read that and I thought, okay, I kind of know what's in store here. And I personally would not want the Martin Ball experience.
Yeah, you made that clear.
Yeah, but I did not see anything there that I thought was unusual. He talks about you can bring a friend, you can record it. He clearly spells out that it can involve being touched anywhere. He makes that very clear. It does state that it's one part of the landscape before he then does an hour consultation. So yeah, I would feel sort of comfortable that if that was something I wanted to do, at the end of reading that document, having that 1 hour consultation where I could, I can only guess at what's said in it, and having the opportunity to sort of to ask questions, then yeah, I would feel that I could make an informed consent there as to whether I wanted to proceed with this or not. And the document itself is not supposed to be a legal document, sort of, listing out every possible outcome. So I personally do not get the problem with that document. I think it's absolutely fine.
So I'd like to, respond. First of all, it's actually there's a couple of things. First of all, we had Dr. Lily K. Ross, who's our gender and editor, gender and gender and arts editor, and she has a PhD in in a number of issues surrounding sexual assault, particularly in the psychedelic community, institutional responses to it. It's fair to say that Dr. Ross is an expert on current concepts of what consent are, and can speak authoritatively about what grooming is. And grooming is a process of not distorting the facts. So gaslighting is taking somebody's plain understanding of the facts and saying that those facts aren't happening. Whereas grooming is recontextualizing the facts that both people agree are happening, right?
Can I just, do you not think that perfectly describes what you've done here in terms of saying we never characterize Martin Ball as sexual delusion? Because this sounds like gaslighting to me. It's you've clearly put it one thing, and now you're saying saying it didn't happen, but it did.
So I've already engaged with and said that I agree with the fact that Martin's non-consensual penetration of
hold on. How do you know it was non-consensual?
Because it's not in the document, and we also spoke to somebody.
It is in the document.
That he can penetrate your oral cavity. That's not in the document.
It's saying that he can touch you anywhere from head to toe, including the pubic area.
So does that mean all the way down the esophagus, as he describes in multiple cases?
Again, if that was something that was agreed within
sure
the bigger landscape.
That's a specific thing that if it were to happen and not be a spontaneous thing, as Martin does describe it as a spontaneous thing, I'm just drawn to people's throats. My thumbs are just way down people's throats. He then describes a woman biting him. Okay, Martin's concepts of consent are so dubious that we probably should question them a little bit closer than I think you have in your video, where you take Martin at face value. Okay, Martin claims that he knows when something is non-consensual, when things have crossed the line, because he feels an electric charge of supposedly non-dual energy. Apparently that didn't happen when his thumbs were down a woman's mouth and she bit him.
Sure.
Okay. So that was absolutely.
I'm sure. Let me speak on his behalf. I'm sure he would say something like, "Well, that's what needed to happen. She needed to bite him, and that was
right." Which is a really authoritarian way of dealing with people. Martin Ball does not have psychic powers.
Of course not. But what he does is what he does, and you can consent to what he does. Now,
I don't believe that you can.
Well, hold on. Look, can I consent to going into having a no holds barred fist fight? Like, can I consent now to going into a jiu-jitsu show and being choked unconscious? Am I allowed to do?
First of all, there's very few I'm a martial artist. There's very few no holds barred fights. There's
you're not been to Germany, mate.
People generally don't like to enter into fights with their limbs broken, and there's a number of things that people wear mouth guards and such. That said, rules of engagement are common, but the part that you don't spend a lot of time on your video, and I'm really surprised, apart from just ignoring two entire articles where we provide the context for the larger questions that you say we could have spent time talking about, when actually that's the focus. The focus here is on questions of consent, questions of authority, questions of pedagogy, and teaching the next generation of what good accepted standard practices actually are. That's the heart and soul of this work. And instead focusing on a few bits of commentary, which I don't deny were part of it, you don't really engage with what seems to be the most clear-cut case of sexual assault, which is the 79-year-old woman who is unconscious, who Martin explains is unconscious in a sort of scary way, like close to death way, and clearly an unexpected way. And what he says is what felt right to me. Now, I don't think what he said is what we talked about beforehand might happen, is I might insert my tongue into your unconscious mouth while I'm laying atop you, even as you might be dying. You might die with my tongue in your mouth. I don't think I think we can infer that Martin Ball never said those things. Now, in the United States, there's maybe Okay, I don't believe it. I'll say that. I can be unequivocal. I do not believe that. In the United States in 2015, there was a Stanford swimmer named Brock Turner. And Brock Turner is a convicted rapist for laying atop an unconscious woman and digitally penetrating her. He's a rapist. So I'm having a hard time parsing how you think that this 79-year-old woman who's unconscious with Martin Ball's tongue in her mouth, how that in any way might be consensual.
Yeah, you would have to ask her.
But based on the evidence that we have.
I would say based on the evidence that we have, which is the information that's right. I mean, it is absolutely no secret at all what Martin Ball does. He's so open about this. Like, he's been talking about it all over YouTube. He's literally written books about it. You've got the information sheets. There's plenty of ex-clients who will tell you exactly what he does. So this is not some guy pouncing out of the shadows and sticking his tongue down people's throats. So I think that it's fairly obvious people know what they're getting when they go to him. And from what I can see, from his book, from his narrative, from his documents that he provides, he tells you that you are signing up for the weirdest possible shit. And we can certainly debate the utility or the woo-woo bullshitness of what he does. And again, we'll probably find a lot of common ground. But I think for you to say that this woman was sexually assaulted and maybe she's a freak, maybe that is entirely what she asked for. And the difference between her and the case that you've just mentioned is that on the one hand, you've got a victim, I presume. I don't know the particular rapist case you're talking about, by the way, but I'm presuming
Brock Turner. You can look up Brock Turner, Stanford.
Yeah, I don't necessarily need to look it up, but I'm guessing on the one hand you've got a victim, and on the other hand you've got no victim. On the other hand, you've got you saying that it's a victim, where all the evidence shows somebody who consented to an event and came out to that event and did not complain about that event. And to be honest, in regards to all the kind of stuff around her being close to death, I think you can't really have your cake and eat it here. Either Martin Ball is completely full of shit, or he's the most reliable witness ever. If he's the most reliable witness ever,
I think the latter is probably the former is probably the case.
Well, okay. Well, how do you know? Well, then in that case, we can't take his word for it that she was close to death. We can't even take his word for it that any of this stuff happened. The guy's just an elaborate storyteller.
So actually, I have a response to that as well. But there's a few things because you put a lot on the table there, right?
Sure.
One, I'm just going to say that if Martin Ball's the kind of guy who tells these stories and just makes them up for entertainment, he shouldn't be on the front of MAPS Canada's executive directors.
I wouldn't disagree.
Okay.
I don't disagree with your that complaint.
Okay, so the second thing is I'm having a real hard time with how charitable you are being to Martin Ball. It is going very far outside of what we would imagine Occam's razor might tell us about a situation. The simplest solution is likely the most is the most likely, right? Mm-hmm. So, I mean, you have presented yourself as a rational voice on this topic, and I don't know why you seem to be so charitable to Martin Ball and this scenario that Martin Ball describes as a life or death scenario. To say literally that she may have asked for such treatment. I'm having a hard time with that one.
Okay. Given what I know about Martin Ball, can I go and sign up and consent for that same thing? I mean, let's map this onto a different person, like someone we've got another mutual interest in, Octavio Rettig.
Let's talk about Octavio. Yeah.
Well, let's just throw him in as an example because obviously I've been very critical of him, but there is no doubt in my mind that the guy who did the infamous water video consented to that. He consented to it, and there is videos of him raving about what a great experience it was. And again, my Spanish is a little bit ropey, but that was a consensual experience, and we can criticize that experience.
Can I interject for one moment here? From that video, which I reviewed recently, if your viewers just go to the timestamp 8:05, they'll hear you saying, if I signed a disclaimer for a shaman to amputate both of my legs, that doesn't mean you can do it.
He knew what he was getting himself into. And I just say, fuck that. This is a sort of bullshit. I don't care what you signed. You know, if I sign a disclaimer for a shaman to be able to like amputate both my legs, that doesn't mean they can do it.
So that sounds like you're second guessing whether or not that was a consensual situation as you were viewing it.
No, because there's some things where, I guess that was a sort of I'd have to look at that comment to reassess.
It's at 8:05 if you want to take a look at it.
Sure. But I would still stand by that guy can do that if they want to. I mean, I can go and have my kidneys removed if I want to. Can go
your legs?
Well, again, like I say, maybe I was speaking a little bit in the heat of the moment or something.
Right. I don't mean to interrupt you, but I also there's a few other things from that commentary that sounded strikingly similar to our own commentary on the what seemed on their face like plainly abusive practices being recounted from the mouth of the person who claimed to have done them. You called that person in that moment defenseless, at the mercy of this individual, that there was nothing healing about it, and that it was just wrong. And that's pretty much our argument about Martin Ball, for which you have taken extreme umbrage for us doing that. So I'm in some ways I'm wondering where the old Rob is. What happened?
Yeah, I think to be completely honest, I think with particularly with the Octavio stuff, because I did a ceremony with Octavio and I endorsed Octavio, and then when I saw when I started getting sent these videos around Octavio, then I had a very visceral reaction to it, and I felt the need to make a statement to counter my recommendation of Octavio, and so that was what I put out. It was a very sort of heat of the moment thing. I tried to balance out the narratives with Octavio's own words and stuff like that. So I can't necessarily remember or go back and would necessarily stand by all the comments or stuff I said in that. I think the overall narrative of that video is fine. It's like, and this is how I'd say it, if you want to sign up for a ceremony with Octavio, go for it. Here's all the information. I didn't have that information when I signed up for it, so I'm almost making those videos for myself and for people like me. And I think the difference between someone like Octavio and someone like Martin Ball is that, first of all, Octavio is, if reports to believe, has a body count, and Octavio has a long list of public ex-clients speaking out against him. I know personally two people in my inner circle here in like Switzerland, in a small village in Switzerland, two people who have been violated by Octavio, where they told him not to do something and he did it anyway. Right. So the difference between Martin Ball and Octavio is different. But I would say that my position on it is that if you want to go and do that with Octavio, that's your right to it. I just want to make sure that you're informed with it. And the same goes here with Martin. I would have reservations about sending my wife to do one of these things. But that's a complete, the orders of magnitude difference between that and calling him a molester and a paedophile and an abuser.
We didn't call him a pedophile.
Sounds like a pedophile. It's part of the narrative.
Compared the grooming tactics, which are common to the actions of pedophiles, to some of the language that was used.
Lily says he sounds like a pedophile.
Yes, that's exactly what Dr. Ross said, and she would have the credentials to identify some of the danger cues that are part of peer-reviewed literature that are ways of identifying serial abusers. Traits like persistence, not taking no for an answer, which Martin Ball admits to on a number of occasions, pushing clients, very much like Octavio Redding, to taking higher and higher doses of 5-MeO-DMT, regardless of what they say in the moment. He says that's just an ego reaction. But
isn't that though part of his? Again, this would be, you can consent.
I do want to back up though, because you put a bunch of stuff on the table, and I wanted to address some of it. One thing goes back to your video. and some of the commentary on our reporting, in which you said that if we had, had evidence or had people who had complaints, that all we had presented were hearsay complaints that were on social media. First of all, hearsay is a standard of evidence that we find in a court of law, and I'd like to remind everybody that we're talking about criminal, illegal activities all across the board. In the United States, 5-MeO-DMT is a controlled substance. I don't think it's helpful to talk about things in sort of that standard when it's easier to simply just talk about ethics. Second of all, I'd like to say that, like, when it comes to the evidence, right? Well, the hearsay, the things that have been put in the public record on comments, social media comments by people who have heard things about Martin Ball. Well, we didn't do that. Those people put those comments out there for others to read and see, and we have amplified them. But that is not the same as us having not done reporting, because we have spoken to people and we have vetted those people who have been clients of Martin Ball, who have said, very similar to your experience with Octavio, that they had a pretty good experience, right? But they were not given an information sheet, which was, claimed was given to all the clients. They were not nothing that Martin did that we took issue with in his video was mentioned in his hour-long talk with this individual. And I will say that despite overall having an experience that they at first considered to be enjoyable, they were uncomfortable with Martin Ball's orbiting around their genitals, and said as much. And they said, much like you in your experience with Octavio, having seen Martin describe some of these activities, they changed their mind about how they felt about Martin Ball. They were shocked by these things, and they would not have wanted them to do them to them. And having given the preparatory materials that they were given by Martin Ball, they would have absolutely considered them to be non-consensual acts. So that is something that we did not share or write. Because
you should have. That's a much more better narrative than what you did say, right?
Because what we're talking about is consent, and as journalists who have ethics, there's right now I can talk about this as an anonymized account. Okay, this person wanted nothing to do with this reporting. Okay, and for good reason, because the 5-MeO-DMT community, not all of them, a lot of them were wonderful, really supportive right off the bat. In fact, most people who've seen this have said, most people like outside of psychedelia have seen this and said, this is crazy stuff, right?
Well, I mean, I'm sure they would say that about most things within psychedelia. I mean, you show something like ayahuasca retreat and people think, well, this is fucking bananas.
The ayahuasca retreats are on Vice Media and on HBO and stuff, and people can handle a little throwing up. But when you're throwing up on somebody's head and pantomiming an orgasm while you're doing it, that rubs people the wrong way.
Yeah, listen, there is no doubt the guy's a freak. Right? He does freaky shit, but people can consent to freaky shit.
I think it's much more easy to describe this person as abusive, and he should be labeled as such. Part, Ryan. I don't think it's bad faith. I don't think it's bad faith. I really think that we've built a pretty good case based on his own admissions of his own behavior.
His admissions of his own behavior. Again, if we're taking that as gospel, then his admissions is that this is all consensual, and you've not got anything to show it wasn't consensual. And all your stuff around sexual abuse is predicated upon it being consensual, non-consensual. So all your stuff around sexual abuse, serial abuse is just goes out the window because you've got nothing to say it wasn't consensual. And we can talk around that consent part, but a person can absolutely consent to something freakish.
So I'm going to talk a little bit about consent, because I think that you've got a somewhat armchair definition of it, and there are pretty sophisticated discussions about times and places and situations and people. And dynamics in which consent, regardless of what words are coming out of people's mouths or what documents they may or may not have signed, are clearly not consensual. So, for instance, I'm going to guess that if a 14-year-old teenager went to Martin Ball for any of his services, including or not including the puking or digital manipulation, I'm going to guess that both of us would not consider that a consensual encounter.
Well, because, yeah, we have a universally agreed standard that children cannot consent.
Right. We also have a universally agreed standard that people who are incapacitated cannot consent.
But people can consent to an event which will leave them incapacitated. So back to the jiu-jitsu situation. I can consent to being knocked unconscious. I can consent to surgery where I'm going to be anesthetized.
Right, surgery that's peer-reviewed and there are ethical standards.
To do with it. The qualification of the people behind it has got nothing to do with it. I could go to a witch doctor in the middle of nowhere and still consent to that surgery. And so it's to do with me. It's to do with what I consent to. It's not to do with the education level of the people who are doing it. Again, because you can move it around to any country or any situation that you want to. So, I mean, and within that consent, I can completely outsource that consent to someone who is going to push me or drive me through an event.
Sure.
So if I woke up in the middle of surgery and said, no, stop, the ethical thing to do would not be for them to go, right, well, he said stop, do it. They would put me back under no matter what I said. That's what I consented to.
Okay. All right. So I've got to say, this is super charitable once again to Martin Ball, who is a doctor, but a doctor of religious studies.
Forget
he's
the
not a
education.
surgeon.
I'm not interested in the education aspect, including
the other thing that you have not discussed is that power differentials and consent are major. So, for instance, there's something that we call command rape that happens in the military. If your commanding officer orders you to sexually satisfy you and you comply with that order, that's somebody who can send you to the front lines. That's somebody who can withdraw your food or make your life incredibly difficult for you, right? There are also similar encounters in the workplace, but generally speaking, where consent conversations are today is that just about any place where a serious power differential exists, like for instance, being a provider of a highly desirable and therapeutic compound, one who is desperate, and people seeking psychedelic therapy often are. These are people for whom other therapeutic methods have failed. Mm-hmm. And so the population of people who seek out 5-MeO-DMT, many of them have been searching for years. Many people will consent to anything to have a toke of the God molecule. And so that is another, aside from all of the other places where a simple, straight read of Martin Ball's own words do not describe what any normal person would consider to be a consensual situation. Aside from that, he presents himself as a very authoritative character, and he's dangling a very highly desirable and therapeutic chemical, or has when in his practice, in front of people and said, take it or leave it. Well, for many of those people, it would simply mean this is the only chance I'll have. And it's such a gulf that meaningful consent doesn't apply.
I think that's a stretch, Ryan. I think you cannot say that on their behalf. They, regardless of whether or not you agree with it, and I don't dispute that there are power dynamics, but you can also consent to entering into a power dynamic. There is a power dynamic with every other person we are in any kind of relationship with. So, when I marry my wife, we are in a power dynamic. With all my friends, there is a power dynamic. With the people I work with, there is a power dynamic. And these are completely consensual on my part. Some of them I'm here, some of them I'm here. So just the existence of a power dynamic does not make it an abusive power dynamic. Surely.
So it does matter what happens within that power dynamic. And
that's not what I said, Brian. The existence of the power dynamic does not make it an abusive power dynamic.
I don't dispute that, but what I'm saying is that while we layer things, right, mm-hmm. We're talking about a power dynamic in which some highly unusual things that very few people look. There is in fact a fetish where people do enjoy consensual vomiting on people as a paraphilia. It's called a Roman shower.
Sure.
I don't believe any of these people participating in these were into it. That sounds like a pretty rare thing, first of all. I don't think that he marketed himself as a sex worker.
No, I don't think so either.
And all of these encounters
hold on. But
sounds very spontaneous.
But this thing of the sex aspect to it, that's you putting the sex narrative on. He doesn't market it in any way as being
I'm simply discussing consent, because I'm trying to walk around the areas in which you're invoking consensual arguments, right? Mm-hmm. You say that, just because a power dynamic exists doesn't make it abusive. However, if there's a power dynamic that exists and then somebody punches somebody in the face or vomits on their face, that person who is in the subordinate power relationship has less of an ability to say and do and complain about it. This is also the case in the fact that all of this is illegal. So we did do pretty good due diligence in that we reached out to Martin before we released any video. We reached out to Mark Hayden before we released any video. We tried to get in contact. We did get in contact with some of Martin's former clients. Martin can't put us in contact with a single client.
I don't think he's required to. That's not for you to do.
He's certainly not. But the ones that we have been encountering and the ones that we've heard tale of, it's not painting a very good picture here.
Well, I mean, that's
paired with his own words. Let's reframe it once again to this individual being elevated as somebody who is going to be teaching the next generation of therapists, who in his own book, An Entheogenic Liberation, I understand when you interviewed him, he read from it. But what he didn't read from it is that he recommends that non-dual practitioners, that they may at some time be required to vomit on their clients and that they will thank them for it.
Sure. Like I say, the guy does some freaky shit.
But is this something you want to see more of in the world? Is it something you want to see more of? Is this a
no? Let's backtrack to the beginning of this conversation. If you want to complain about Martin Ball being the representative person for this psychedelic guide, and that's your complaint, I would support you, Brian. Like I said, I think there's better people who could write that forward. I've got no problem with that. But the hysterical sort of conflation of what you're going to is wrong. It's just plain wrong.
You keep calling us hysterical. So hysteria is a condition that was, posited long ago to explain women's, emotional outbursts. It was thought that hysteria was a migrating womb moving around a woman's body and causing trouble. I do think that we have legitimate concerns that we're raising here. They have wide-reaching consequences. We have engaged with a big context, and we've tried to center issues of abuse and consent and best practices. But your video focused on our social media footprint, which
because that's where you cross the line.
In other places, you said that social media comments, amount to shit. So there are things that, like, and I stand by.
No. What I said was hearsay Facebook comments don't count for shit. Those things which you plastered everywhere don't count for shit. They're less than jack shit. Your voice via social media representing Psymposia, because that's what you're doing. You are promoting Psymposia. You are speaking as Psymposia.
Sure.
This is representative of Psymposia.
And so if you look at what I'm saying is that where the emphasis is a much larger story about MAPS and MAPS Canada being negligent. And that is something that you've chosen not to focus on.
Because that's not where you cross the line.
And nor do you even link to it anywhere. So in terms of
I'm not interested in it, Brian. It's not right. My interest is not in your beef, the chip on your shoulder that you guys have with MAPS. You go for it. I honestly don't care about that. What I care about is bullshit, and bullshit is bullshit no matter what sauce you're serving with it, whether it's religious bullshit or culty bullshit or guys who say they can heal people with with sticking 5-MeO DMT up their ass or whatever. But what you guys are doing is the same kind of bullshit. You have taken something and amplified it into absurdity with zero evidence,
That's not true. We've presented original evidence that was not previously available to the public.
Which evidence? What are we talking about?
The session info document that we.
That's not evidence. That's he's something he wouldn't. I mean, the words are more or less there within his books anyway. He pretty much says the same stuff in the YouTube stuff.
Right. So it's not. I want to talk a little bit about reason and consistency. So sure. you've made a sort of a persona, or I'm sure you deeply hold beliefs around rationality. And I would agree. I teach university students. I think that psychedelics are extremely confusing subjects, and around which there's a lot of bullshit and misinformation, and in some cases disinformation. So being rigorous and consistent and rational, I support that. But I'm having a hard time comparing your reaction to Octavio and your reaction to Martin Ball. You see a video of Octavio pouring water down his throat at the time. You call it abusive bullshit. Mm-hmm. And now you're calling it potentially consensual. And I think that you were right the first time.
No, I would reword the Octavio. If I was going to do the Octavio video, no, I would definitely choose a different set of words. I would describe it as dangerous, intrusive, unnecessary. This is exactly the same kind of language I've used around the Martin Ball stuff. I don't see the point of it. And I would say if people want to do that, I think they fucking that's it's stupid, but that's their business. But even then, when I was in my most emotional and visceral reaction to Octavio, I wasn't trying to get Octavio cancelled. I was saying I was actually trying to have a dialogue with him. I was saying I hope that he changes his ways on this, because I don't. So those sound like several times. I don't think he's a bad guy. I just think he's completely misguided.
Right. So I mean, the things that you were hoping to get out of Octavio sounds like a process of accountability, right? So Octavio's doing things out there in the world, and you'd probably like to see him not continue doing those things, and you would advocate for, and I believe many people did in fact engage with Octavio to try and get him, and that didn't go so well, right? Sure. But you seem to be pro accountability for people who do and say things that are problematic, right? So this is exactly the process that we've gone through with Martin Ball. We do not think, as a result of the things that Martin Ball has said or done, that he has any place of authority that is, to be encouraged by anybody with credibility in the psychedelic in the psychedelic world. And just accusing us of canceling somebody without really talking about what it means, which is a process of accountability for the things that a person has said or done. I mean, Martin Ball discusses, and this is another instance where you're extremely charitable to Martin Ball, discusses one of his clients decking him in the face and fleeing the scene. Mm-hmm. Now, that sounds like an alarming situation. And sure. I've been taking psychedelics for 25 years, and I've definitely encountered people who are out of control, who are upset, who are even violent sometimes. However, in the context of Martin Ball's incredibly intrusive stuff, that's exactly the sort of thing that might trigger somebody, and their defense, their personal autonomy could feel threatened to the point where they defend themselves while psychedelized under 5-MeO-DMT, and something that maybe was blanketly gestured at might happen. In a nonverbal way where the facilitator is also high, causes that person to punch them. So what I'm saying is, and we titled our video this for a reason, it's all red flags. And my question to you, Rob, is how many red flags is too many red flags?
I would say, I think red flags are red flags. And I think you can address them as red flags, and they're just as legitimate as red flags. And that conflating them into pedophilia, molestation, sexual abuse is bullshit. You've crossed the line. That didn't happen. You've not got anything.
We didn't say that he was a pedophile.
When you start putting out that this person is, when you describe what he's doing as molesting people, then you are making a statement.
I would call what he was doing molesting
correct
people.
of you to do so. Then that's not accurate.
I think it's entirely accurate.
Well, it's not.
Let's move on to your earlier point. If I say that that Donald Trump acts like a dictator, which I think we could probably agree he did, that's not the same as me saying he is a dictator.
No, but if you said
just an analogy,
molested someone, then that's a different thing altogether. So yeah,
right.
the acts like when you're saying that Martin Ball acts like a paedophile, yeah, sure, and I can say, again, I think it would be, I could say no, Brian Pace, and I don't mean this, Brian, please don't take me literally, but I could say,
I hear you. I've got a thick skin.
You act like a child molester. Now, and again, we could have the same conversation, but that's a different thing saying Brian Pace is a child molester.
I 100% agree with you.
And that's what
I don't disagree.
Said. That's the line.
No, we did not ever say that he is a child molester.
I will put on the screen the tweets that show Russell stating that, describing what he's doing as, what is Martin Ball's thing is as molesting.
It is molesting. If somebody I go back to our earlier discussion where we clarify the difference in the usage between a child molester, which the victim is a person who is underage, and just simply molesting a person who is incapacitated, which Martin Ball admits to on a number of occasions.
It's not molestation. You cannot prove it was molestation. That's the stretch, Brian. That's the line you cross. You cannot
again, the proof is in the. I don't want to talk over you.
Go for it, mate.
So people are allowed to have opinions, and we're allowed to make cases. And when it comes to the opinions of my team, I mean, I think that in our opinion and our assessment of the body of words that Martin Ball has put into writing and multiple formats like the session information sheet and his lamps talk, there's a lot there that seems to us to meet the standard of sexual abuse, of general abuse, of subjecting people to indignity, and we will describe that. You can say that we've crossed the line because you disagree, but I also think you're throwing the baby out with the bathwater by focusing on these issues rather than the larger discussion that you claimed that you were interested in having, which was that we are having about who gets to be an authority on these topics. And for a minute there, Maps and Maps Canada said, Martin Ball seems like a good guy. We're gonna plaster him on top of this book and recommend his book where therein Martin Ball recommends doing these things, and we found that problematic and in fact alarming. So if we're hysterical, we're hysterical about making sure that people are not abused, manipulated into doing things that are entirely unnecessary. That somebody who is completely unhinged and has no self-control, admittedly, he says, I make it up as I go along. He describes many cases where he's psychedelized on 5-MeO-DMT, just doing whatevs, which includes shoving his fingers down people's throats and manipulating their genitals. I don't think anybody should be standardizing that. I think that would be a bad thing. That's my position. That's Symposia's position.
Again, like I said,
it's also the main point of our reporting here.
It may well be the main point of your reporting, but during the course of that reporting, you have gone off the rails and just basically you've shat in the pool of discourse, because now you've made it so that what might be, like I say, a perfectly legitimate complaint about who should write this forward, what should be the narrative of this training guide. And I've agreed with you many times here, Brian. I can agree that Martin Ball is possibly not the best person to write this forward.
Okay,
but so you've shat in the pool, and now you've made it into this much uglier, like grotesque version of what it was. Let me throw out an example at you, Brian, because there's something that just kind of jumped to mind when you're talking, which I think we would probably agree on is equally as kind of all the things that you dislike are in the Martin Ball stuff. I think we'd probably dislike around this. So colonic irrigation. What are your thoughts on that? So, I mean, I'll let me tell you what my thoughts on it. I think it's pointless. I think it's intrusive. I think it's unnecessary. I think there's, You can make the argument that it's dangerous and damaging to the gut biome, or it can, rupture people's insides of it. It doesn't require any medical training. It's unregulated. I think colonic irrigation is a complete load of shit. I mean, no pun intended. I know if I walk out down the street and some guy jumps out and sticks a hose pipe up my ass and starts pumping it full of water, then we've got a problem. But if I walk into a clinic, given everything that I've just said, if I walk into a colonic irrigation center and agree for them to do this incredibly ridiculous, intrusive act, which I know all about up front, I can do that. I'm allowed to do that. And I could then tell you about like having this pipe shoved up my ass and how I disliked it. That doesn't make it non-consensual. That's the leap you're taking.
Okay, so if that's the analogy you want to engage with, that's fine. I don't know a whole lot about the literature around colonic irrigation. I know that sometimes people are recommended to do it before certain surgical procedures. Regardless, I don't want to get too far into the shit, as it were. What I would like to say is that we didn't just hysterically raise this point. We had a very strategic discussion about what it is that we were doing. And one of the things that we were doing was putting a certain amount of pressure on an institution that often finds itself to be not that accountable. Now, in terms of what happened, the result of our reporting, we were correct. In terms of what happened is when these statements of Martin Ball were brought to MAPS attention, MAPS refused to endorse their executive director of their satellite organization's own guide. They distanced themselves from Martin Ball. They called the practices bizarre. They called them disturbing. And all of this is a positive outcome in terms of the material discourse that we're having about the future of psychedelia. In terms of the harms that were mitigated,
no, Brian.
In this case,
the end does
no.
not
This
justify the means.
this isn't up for debate. I can show you right here. So this is the guide, and it has Martin Ball's name on the front. And if you order one, again, if you go on Amazon now, Martin Ball's been scrubbed. MAPS hired a PR agent to deal with this.
I'm aware, but
because it's inappropriate.
What you're saying is
for
that
him
the
to
end
be a part of
justifies
this.
the means, and I would say no. That what you have done here with, with the way that you've framed this narrative is, it does not justify just because you've got this chip on your shoulder about MAPS. Again, you could have
It's
done.
not a chip on our shoulder about MAPS. This calls into the question the due diligence of an organization that will be managing the vulnerable psyches of
What about
thousands
the due diligence
of people.
of you guys? I'm not seeing it.
In this case, what we have done is we have pointed out dangerous practices that have no basis in any ethical or clinical or peer-reviewed grounding that were actively being promoted by the most visible psychedelics advocacy group in the world. And as a result, they changed course. So
because
I don't know what to say otherwise.
Outrage. You manufactured.
It's not. I'm telling you, it's very real outrage on the part of
I know it's
Symposia
all from
myself.
Symposia, and it's manufactured within Symposia, and that's the source that you're putting back on, and that's the source that you guys are brobroadcasting.
I think your priorities are completely screwed up.
I get that. I also think your priorities
are
are
focusing on entirely, the very minutia of this particular debate, and you're missing the forest for the trees. That's my opinion.
No, I think the important part of the forest to me is the discourse, and that's the bit that you've shown blatant disregard for.
Let's talk about the discourse for a minute. Because part of the issue here is, in some ways, one of the other reasons why I'm here is that you put together a video that strung together a number of insults towards that included me, but were directed at members of my team, including Dave and Russell. And I'd say that if we were to apply the standards of conduct and discourse and evidence that you have tried to apply to my team in Symposia, I don't think you would rise to that standard. I don't think you would live up to your own expectations.
I would counter there, Brian. I think the standards which Symposia show are actually the bottom of the barrel, because the stuff that David Nichols and
we don't
Russell,
insult people.
You do worse. You interpret everything through this terrible bad faith filter, constantly looking to cherry pick out anything that can be weaponized against them. And this is what David Nichols tried with me. And this is why I say that David Nichols is a complete bellend, because this thing where he cherry picked out this bit and tried to frame me as an anti-Semite is obscene. And that just shows
he asked you for clarification on your comments in your video, in which you made up a scenario where instead of the Jewish client that Martin Ball sat on the chest of and said that his intergenerational trauma that he was voicing was absolute bullshit, and to get out of my house in a very authoritarian way. I also want to point out that on several occasions.
He said, take that shit. It didn't say get out of my house. He said, don't bring that shit into my house.
Okay, thank you for the correction. But on several occasions you have dwelled upon the alleged authoritarianism of myself and my team, but you seem incredibly charitable to the authoritarianism repeatedly demonstrated by Martin Ball, literally sitting on people's chests and pounding his ego, talking about how his house is not the place for people to talk about their stories or their ethnic identity.
I think we're getting lost. We're changing gears here. We're talking about David Nichols, and we're talking about
I wanted some David Nichols because it's in a different.
David took that snippet, framed it in an extremely provocative, bad faith way, basically insinuated that I was equating Jewish people with the Ku Klux Klan, and he was pressing it he was reposting it. And when I didn't bite on it, I said, David, it's up to you. You can take it however you want to. He then went from one social media platform to another one and started reposting the same thing, and then lying about it, saying that I was denying it. So David Nichols is a bad actor, and there's not going to be any reversal of my position here. David Nichols is a bellend of the highest order.
So I disagree. First of all,
no shit.
I'd also say that you really don't understand how Symposia works. David's not our boss. This is a collective of individuals, so he's not the leader. He's the managing editor, because that's a good way of describing the role that he plays at Symposia in terms of managing certain parts of things on the back end. I'm going to say right now that David Nichols, as an individual, has contributed more to psychedelia and advancing certain debates that are pressing and in front of everyone right now, such as patents and abuse and compass pathways. He's very far ahead of the curve. And there's if somebody takes issues with his tone or my tone for that matter, you need to take a look at the substance of his words. And the substance of his words with you was that he thought that comparison was a bad take, and he was asking you to clarify if you had. Now you've run with that and said that he was calling you an anti-Semite. Dave is Jewish, and I think that in terms of asking somebody to clarify about their statements,
he wasn't asking me to clarify.
That's one thing.
I mean, and he wasn't. And the way that he jumped from one platform to
he was asking
again, I will put the clips on the screen as we have this conversation. He then jumps from one platform to another and starts repeating it, but with a twist. He lied about it. Now, you might say that David's sort of work gives him a free pass from this sort of thing. My experience of David, and this is, I've heard so many people, the amount of messages I got congratulating me on calling David Nichols a bellend should worry you, because he's incredibly
the quality of your audience than the.
You should be concerned because we have a surprising amount of mutual people who both watch Symposia, and I think the tide. I would say, I'd say you can dismiss what I say. I think you would be foolish to just give David a free pass here.
What happens
He's a toxic guy.
Is when we talk about things that are controversial, but we back them up with facts, as we do at Symposia as a journalistic outlet. People dislike what it is that we're saying, but rather than engage with the content, they claim that that we're saying it wrong. If we said it better, that they would engage better. They say, oh, well, you're a bad faith actor because you don't back down from your opinions or from your statements that you've backed up.
Well, this is specifically why I did a 4-section video with the first section is dismissing the evidence and debunking the evidence, and the fourth one being the one where I sort of went into the insult mode just to get it off my chest. So I think in that particular example, I think the evidence of what you presented is completely vapid. There's nothing there. And then at the end, for people who've decided to stick with it that long, it's quite a long video, then they get to see me sort of go off at David Nichols and I can completely stand by that. There was nothing. There's no sort of shocking truth evidence.
So
that's people
in terms, and this is where I point to, the standard that you hold us to and the standard that you hold yourself to. There's a lack of consistency because,
well, there's the standard that you advertise that you guys are, which is journalists, and I'm generally
not. Okay, so I mean, I'm going to say that you're a de facto journalist.
I'm not.
Whether you like it or not, you engage in a YouTube journalism where you commentate on individuals, you provide reviews of ayahuasca retreats and what have you, and whether or not you consider yourself a journalism, you're doing journalism, right? And you've claimed that we have no journalistic ethics. We ran all our reporting by an award-winning journalist. Okay, this is outside of the core people who operate Psymposia. Like, I don't see the standards that you're claiming that we have not adhered to being applied to yourself in any way. And I would just say, apart from journalism, let's just talk about good faith and bad faith. Okay.
Sure.
I would say that in terms of making time to deal with your complaints. Someone from Psymposia that you haven't called a bell end, I'd say I've showed up here in good faith to engage with your complaints.
For sure,
I would say that I would not be required to, and nobody from Psymposia would be required to, given the way that you characterized our organization and the people within it.
Yeah, well, I'm not entitled to this response. It was a friendly invitation, and I'm genuinely grateful that you.
Friendly is not the kind of invitation.
It was friendly before David Nichols fucked it up. Okay, it was perfectly cordial, and then afterwards he started with, when he wasn't getting his own way on Facebook. That's when he started with all the anti-Semite shit. But before that, it was completely genuine. When I put out that
At
first
no point
public
did Dave Nichols call you an anti-Semite.
Well,
and I understand that your wife
I understand
that your wife is Jewish.
It's irrelevant what my wife is. It's irrelevant.
Well, you did bring it up, and all I have to say is that you're not married to Dave Nichols. And so in terms of the way that you show up in public, right? A person can say things that offend people of certain identities and backgrounds and ethnicities, regardless of who it is that their other relationships are. And if somebody then questions you about that it's not really an adequate defense to say, oh, well, I have a free pass. Okay. And that's all that happened. Nobody called you an anti-Semite. Somebody asked you to clarify your comments. I think you go back towards it, you'll see that's the case.
I'll certainly, I can, again, I'll put the comments on the screen. We'll let the audience decide on that one.
And I will also provide a little bit more context to say that in my own reporting for Psymposia, I've written quite a bit about the fact that the far right and white supremacists are not mutually exclusive with the psychedelic community. So in terms of asking people to clarify what it is that they're really saying, there's no assumption that just because people share the same taste in drugs, that we share the same values or worldviews or even basic thoughts on human equality.
Yeah, sure. I think that's a given, but I think it's my issue with what David does is that he seems to be permanently looking for this worst take. I've seen him do with numerous people. I've seen Russell do the same thing. He's always looking for the worst take, and he weaponizes it. And that's, I think, is perfectly obvious what he was trying to do with me. And for that reason, I've written the guy off. He's a toxic little shit. I have no time for that. And I think you as Psymposia are doing yourselves a disservice, because everything you're saying, Brian, I believe you. I think you've got heart. Yeah? I believe your heart's in the right place. But within this kind of echo chamber that you're constructing for yourselves, then like one of you should have the spine to say, this is not right. You shouldn't be doing this. This is not productive. When
it is productive in the sense that when we reported on this topic, an institution changed its stance, and MAPS doesn't.
No, we're not talking about. We're talking about the are we talking right now about the interaction between David and I? Because that's what the topic was. Why do I think David's a bellend?
Well, I guess what I'm saying is that there are a lot of individuals out there who want to tone police Symposia for having heterodox views. We're not psychedelic cheerleaders. We care more about people than we do about the psychedelic renaissance. We care more about people not being subjected to abuses than anybody's career. And none of us are trying to be psychedelic therapists or rock stars. It's pretty laughable the way that people have responded, saying that Symposia is doing this because it fits our business model. We're a nonprofit. We have no paid staff. I don't understand people's characterization of our work in this manner.
I mean, I wouldn't. I personally would not say that. I don't know if there is a business model ever. I think what I would say is that you seem to be doing it to justify your ego, justify this. You've got these set of ideas that everyone's a victim and that everyone's being abused, and you're just looking to twist the facts to fulfill that narrative.
We do not believe that everyone is a victim and that everyone is being abused, but we do.
Just everyone who went to Marty Ball.
As a watchdog organization, it does so happen that a lot of things that we report on happen to be in the darker side of things because somebody needs to. Otherwise, we're going to be watching a bunch of sponsored content about the latest corporadelic firm out there that has made up some claim about a brain helmet or microdosing in virtual reality. And a bunch of people are going to go along with it because, affiliate marketing works. And we talk about things in the public interest because there's millions of dollars on the table. And we have consistently been ahead of the curve in terms of breaking journalism, doing real research that nobody is bothering to do in terms of patents, abusers, cultural issues that other people won't pay attention to because they're too busy drinking their own Kool-Aid. And in this way, I gotta say, Rob, I'm a little bit disappointed because I saw the body of your work before all of this went down, and I saw you as somebody who is critical of cults and taking a look at these retreats and saying things that maybe they didn't like to hear after you went, and for some reason you seem to think that Symposia is a bad actor, despite the fact that I'm happy to show up on your channel after you insult my friends and advocate for our
your
ideas.
friends insulted me, Brian. Like you're giving them the free pass, but that's what it looked like. And in terms of the cult mentality, then I think that is what is going on in Symposium. It does have this kind of, there is a cultishness. Symposia is always right. You instantly just shout down and dismiss in, again, fairly grotesque, exaggerated ways anyone who has the slightest disagreement. And I do appreciate that you watched my work previously, and I do appreciate the nice things you've just said about it. And maybe this is something you want to take on board here, because wouldn't we be better like shoulder to shoulder here, Brian? Like when you've got people like me, and I don't want to name drop other people, but I know who are mutual or were sort of mutual, but people are stepping out saying, "Whoa, Symposia are like, you're just pulling the chili pepper out of the chili and saying this chili's too spicy." You can't do that. You have to taste the whole chili. You can't just take that one bit out and say this is everything that is wrong with chili. Okay, but that's what you're doing. I hope that made sense.
Well, I mean, to engage with your metaphor, I would say that if there were a bunch of people who had never eaten chilies, and I actually studied chili for a little while in Oaxaca. But there are some chilies that are quite mild, and there are some chilies that are not. You'd probably like somebody to say, "Hey, that one over there, it's going to hurt you." That's Absolutely. What Symposia does.
Yeah, but then they go a little bit too far and say, and anyone who has eaten that one has been molested. I mean, do you not think that's incredibly damaging, even just for the people who went through this and were fine with it, for the people who wanted it, and for you're just trying to say that everyone is a victim? Like,
again, I did not say that everyone was a victim, but I would say that.
If you're saying that they cannot consent, this is what you're saying, they cannot consent to this event. And so I would say
that in the scenarios that were described, those don't sound like consensual relationships to me. And yes, I do believe that we can make that assessment based on the information that we have. I think that just like the metaphor where we have a number of broad categories and scenarios where without much information, we can say that doesn't sound consensual. I would say that what was described falls into that bin. And it sounds like you disagree. I think it speaks for itself.
Okay, let me just come back to that earlier point, because I think it was a good one. Do you not think you'd be in a better position if with allies? Because I just see Symphosia.
We're not without allies. We have many allies
within the community.
It
looks to me like it's dropping, and the only people that are left are the people who want that kind of outrage content. I mean, if you look at the sort of like read through the sort of the comments on your video, it's very binary between people absolutely disagreeing with you or people going with your narrative and starting screeching about predators and paedophilia and all this kind of stuff. So, and I think you are basically doing a Pepsi challenge for your audience here, and you are selecting for the most extreme. And the people like myself, who, as you've just agreed, up until this kind of point, we're like on the good guy side. And again, we could name other people, are now saying, "Whoa, Symphosia have lost the fucking plot here." And not only are we saying lost the plot, but that there are certain toxic elements within Symphosia, and that there is something here where the ship needs to right itself. If you guys are going to fulfill this watchdog position, which I think you are in no way qualified, based on this episode, to be.
Who are our competitors in that vein? Who is stepping up to fill this role? Do you have somebody in mind?
You don't need competitors. You just need not to be suitable, and that's what I think you are.
So who generally elects watchdogs to hold power to account?
Within a sort of underground psychedelic community, the community polices itself. There's no authority within this thing.
If the community policed itself, I'd have nothing to do all day. And I'm not saying that I'm a cop. What I'm saying is if I didn't constantly, if to the people who want to tone police Symphosia and say that we're angry, I'll give them that. But if you knew some of the things
you're angry. I think you're
extremely
toxic and extremely coming at this through this.
Do you think this conversation has been toxic?
This conversation? No, Brian. I think honestly, I was very glad to receive the email from you, because I'd already formed the opinion that you were one of the more level-headed ones. I think this conversation has gone pretty well. And again, I'm genuinely appreciative of you making the time to do so, Brian. But I think you've still failed to provide any justification for the line that you crossed.
You've failed to accept any of the justifications that I've put on the table.
Sure. Yeah.
That's where we are. I understand that. I showed up so that the things that you put forth had some context, which you did seem to be asking for. If I were somebody who saw your video and hadn't seen any others, I would be wondering what it was that Symphosia was banging on about, because there was no mention of MAPS or MAPS Canada, which you do agree would have been a bad thing if Martin Ball was enthroned in such a way. In terms of manufacturing authority and getting like the ultimate line on one CV, in the psychedelic world, it's pretty hard to get a better one than an endorsement from Rick Doblin. Okay.
I mean, I don't know. Again, I think we can sort of dance around whether it would actually be an endorsement. Personally, I might sound like a bit of a heathen here, but I honestly don't care who writes a foreword for any book. I very rarely read the forewords book. I'm just more interested in the actual book.
Do you ever read the recommended readings after you've read a really good book? Do you ever take a look and see if the author recommends another book? Because
honestly, no.
All right. Well, so I'm an academic. All right.
Sure. And this is why you've got a different,
And as an academic,
I'm an ordinary Joe.
Right.
And what I'm seeing, you're seeing things from this very academic, certainly this very left-wing sort of, your sort of academic viewpoint on it. I'm seeing things different, like just on the ground, like what the fuck are these guys talking about? This is, and I think that's the sort of, that's the reaction that I'm seeing a lot of people similar to me like this. We can all say whether we agree or disagree with Martin Ball, but I think a lot of people are saying, but I disagree with what Psymposia are doing here. And that's
right.
That's
in this
limiting
case,
for you guys.
We definitely saw, individuals who were supporters of Dr. Ball try and turn this around as a referendum on Psymposia. As I would say, your video was in that genre, that, Martin Ball may have done some things that I wouldn't recommend my wife or really anybody participate in. But the real problem here is Psymposia. Mm-hmm. That seems to be the argument.
Yeah, just like as I said, I wouldn't recommend my wife having a 15-inch dildo shoved up her. But gotcha. I'm not going to tell people that they can't do that. I'm not going to say people that things are perverts because they do that or that they're molesting each other. Again, this is the eat the poo-poo thing. You're getting, who cares what they're doing? You have to prove that they didn't consent.
You see, I care because the normalization of activities that I identify on its face as abusive, as you did when you watched Octavia pouring water on down people's throats. I identified these things as dangerous, and I spoke out against it, as did my organization, and we put considerable time and strategy towards making sure that those ideas did not get legitimacy, as they had already gained the only kind of legitimacy that is available in this space. So in terms of the action that we took.
So nice, Brian, you explained this so clearly and concisely now that I cannot help but agree with you. Why didn't you just stick with that? Why did you have to go this extra?
If you read the article, the first one and the second one, it's pretty clear what's happening.
I read them all, Brian. And again, this is why I don't address those particular things, because that's not the bit I'm interested in. The bit I'm interested in is where you cross the line. That's the bit where I had to say, whoa, now I've got to pay attention to what these guys are doing, because this is, like I say, it's a shit in the pool. This is where it's gone wrong. And you are not allowed to have to go in that direction. It's wrong.
I'm pretty sure I'm allowed to do whatever I want.
But literally you are.
As we're talking about the words that I say, nobody's paying me to do this. And if you're going to be talking about how we're some sort of sensational outlet, you can find a lot worse out there than Psymposia. I don't happen to think that we're a sensational outlet. I think that we do quite a bit of research and due diligence in terms of backing up everything that we say, which is part of the reason why I think some people who disagree with us talk about things that are completely, sideways from what the content of what we're saying, because that's the only thing to engage with. If you don't want to
anything regarding this thing, though.
What's that?
You've not backed up anything regarding this thing. The evidence that you have.
So let's recap here, because at this point, what I've pointed to is that in your video, much of what you have argued hinges upon your idea of what consent looks like. I have presented several examples in which consent doesn't look like that. I've pointed to the fact that we haven't. I've pointed to the fact that we have spent a considerable amount of time with an actual expert on consent talking about these issues, and that person has come to a different conclusion than you. And beyond that, I've explained the broader context of our reporting that you claimed that we weren't interested in engaging with. So that's what I came here to do. And I mean, I think we're starting to orbit a little bit.
Yeah. Well, let me just wrap up in the way that you'd wrapped up. So I think that I don't think you've provided a suitable justification for why you've spread this narrative across your various channels. I think saying that it's not part of your official reporting is either completely naive or just a completely dishonest representation. It is part of the voice of Symphosia. You guys, there was a sort of, this revoicing of each other's comments through the main Symphosia channels. And I think we can agree that if I use that same framing for you, it would be completely, a completely grotesque manipulation of the facts. If I said, here's my interview with the child molester or molester Brian Pace, I think, what you put out there as evidence repeatedly with these hearsay comments are hearsay comments. Whatever you say that you've got other stuff in the background, but that's, again, nobody wanted to come forward with that. You've been so selective with what you did share around it about what was said around consent that you just kind of, it looks like you deliberately obscured it. And it looks like you've just done all this because have got this chip on your shoulder around sort of whatever's going on between you and Maps, which again is fine. You guys knock yourselves out with that, but how you've sort of twisted the narrative, I think is really repulsive, Brian. And I would hope that you would take this on board and do something to right the ship, because honestly, I think you are. If there is a setup of a continuum of, sort of like, reasonable or rational and irrational sort of dialogue within the psychedelic space, I honestly think you guys are off in like some sort of pocket dimension of your own insanity at the moment.
I think if you go back through this video, you'll see that I've pointed out a number of places where you've abandoned rationality so that you can be mad at Symphosia. And
I'm not mad at Symphosia. I'm really disappointed with you.
You're not consistent with your own previous takes. So I don't know what else to say.
Okay, well that's fine. We don't have to keep going in circles. But yeah. I will say, mate, I genuinely do appreciate the time. I genuinely do appreciate you stepping up, and that you've, I think you are one of the more balanced ones at Symphosia. Again, I'm viewing this a lot through the lens of what you guys do broadcast via social media. So I would maybe take that to your next group meeting. That maybe you want to. Rethink your strategy around social media, because I would say the perception is that it makes you look like, I hate to say it, but irrational, emotional, responsive arseholes. It's just throwing mud everywhere. But again, I sincerely do appreciate the time. So is there anything else you want to say before we wrap up then, Brian?
Just that if, people are interested in the content of what we've actually put forward in our reporting, not just on our Twitter, our individual Twitter, you can check out our YouTube at Symphosia. You can check out our podcast, +3, and it's all at symphosia.com.
Yeah, and likewise, if you want to see the criticism video that spawned this debate, you can check that out on Adeptus Psychonautica. It includes all these tweets, which were retweeted by the main Symphosia channel, along with a lot of stuff that I didn't put in there, but I'll put some in here so there's a bit of a context for people. But I guess we'll just leave it there then, Brian.
Sounds good. Thanks for your time.
See you, Brian. Bye.